NATO seeks to bury the Russian economy again, and Putin has responded. All of this is taking place at the tactical and strategic level. You can have all the great ideas you want and strategy and thoughts of things that are upper echelon, but if it can't translate into ground truth reality, it's just noise. It's just meaningless. And as we've talked about for the last 3.5 years, Western countries, NATO, the United States specifically, especially under the Biden administration, have tried to and bragged about how they would destroy the Russian economy. Obviously didn't work in the first go around. Actually, the Russian economy grew at a faster pace than the British and much of the Western European countries did. In fact, as a bloc, Western European countries are an anemic 1% in the last year. Evidence suggests that they may be heading towards a recession, and some countries actually are already in recession. So I'm not really sure why you would want to go down that path. But as we talked about, sometimes, usually, actually, the Western countries don't seem to pay attention to actual realities, and they keep talking things. They keep taking actions based on the hope that what they want to occur will occur, and they don't seem to be deterred by any actions on the ground. Let's run over to the tactical map here. Now, we're going to start off actually in the southern part of the zone today, in the Zaporizhia area. We've been warning about a lot of times that the Russians have been preparing for a summer offensive. They had started it in the Kupiansk area and a couple of other areas earlier on in the Sumy area. They were moving after they had retaken the Kursk area from Ukraine. But as we'll see here in a minute, actually, I'll just talk about that part now. The Sumy has gone into what looks like an operational pause. I don't know if they've culminated, if they've changed their forces and moved them to take priorities elsewhere. That's unknown. What is known is that after having some pretty good success for a while, they have now kind of gone to ground a little bit. There's strikes back and forth, or artillery strikes going on either side of the line, drone strikes, etc. But there hasn't been any meaningful ground taken in either direction, gained or lost. So for the moment, the Sumy area is kind of put on pause. What's not on pause is in the southern area in the Zaporizhia zone. This is Zaporizhia, the city right here. This is Zaporizhia Oblast right here. And when you zoom in a little bit here, there's a couple of specific areas here where there's been some recent engagements, and that is in the Kaminskia area, which is right here by this by the lake over on this side. After a lot of preparation, there's been weeks actually of preparation where lots of Russian forces were seen moving to the north as much as they can anyway, massing up in this area, tens of thousands of troops. You may recall also this was the site of where the Ukrainians launched their 2023 offensive. Russia stopped that, and now that it appears that after a pretty good delay, they're now again moving in this area. So this looks like where they're going to put some of their priority of efforts, and I'll show you why I think that is. First of all, what the Russians have been doing is in all these areas in the tactical rear area, 10 to 30 kilometers in the rear, they've been doing lots of attacks with drones, the long-range drones, even some glide bombs and some other missiles as well. When you see the Russians using, especially some of the missiles in the tactical rear areas, that tells you that's important to them because those missiles are at a premium. And when you see all of those things combined, along with long-range artillery, hitting troop concentrations, command and control centers, weapons and ammunition depots, fuel depots, etc., that tells you they're probably getting ready to do something because they're going to take in this whole area here. They want to limit the ability of the Ukraine side to move troops into any particular areas. Then you get down here into the Kamenskaya area, and there has been some advancement of the Russians in here. There's been some fresh movements up into this area right here, especially. They're moving into the city. And then when you come over to Malotachmachka, if I can move the map over here, excuse me. This has been another area where they actually have moved into some areas where they haven't been before, and they are moving some of their troops into this. Is the Malotachmachka here, and you can see that's moving closer to the medium-sized town of Orkhiv. But the Russians have recently taken some of this area right here, and they continue to take the eastern part of Malotachmachka, which is, again, putting more pressure on the Ukraine side down into here, because if the Russians continue to move up with the pincher here, and then over, if they now put more pressure on this road leading into Orkhiv, that's going to put all of this into yet another cauldron, which is kind of the Russia's modus operandi over the last couple of years especially. And I think that the purpose of all of this in the Zaporizhia, I think that probably this is all leading to, first of all, try to clear a path over here and take this whole area to clear it out of the Ukrainian forces. And then probably, this is probably a multiple weeks or months process, to move up to the Zaporizhia and possibly cut that off. I doubt they would take the city because that would take too many troops, but I think they can move up probably along this route here. I think it's the M19, and to cut off, there's a rail transport which runs up to help. Let me show you a little bit further in the map up here, up in the Pokrovsk area. This is where Ukraine has been holding out and made a fortress for quite a number of months now. Russia was made a lot of progress toward the end of last year. Then they've kind of surrounded it, and they're continuing, especially on the right flank here, to make additional progress here in the last week or so. They continue to hit the city and to do things along the north, but these are just kind of smaller scale things. The only area where they seem to be making progress is up here. But by taking the Zaporizhia area down here and its rail lines that connect it to Pokrovsk, that would then potentially minimize Ukraine's ability to reinforce with logistics and troops and everything else in the Pokrovsk area. So if you eventually are able to shut this off, maybe by the end of the summer, and you keep the pressure going on here on the flank, then now that this becomes much more tenable or untenable because they don't have the ability to move the supplies of the truck, and then they can just be overtaken with sheer numbers. Then when you get up also, let's zoom back out a little bit here into the Kupiansk area. There's been additional progress around the city of Kupiansk. Just kind of roll up here. You see this progress here in the northern part of Kupiansk. And again, you see what's forming a very large cauldron in this area. And if Russia continues to move up along this southern route and this northern part of it, and there's been more progress here since we've last talked to you about it, this latest finger going up here, these things are all additional Russian and recent Russian progress, which puts the Ukrainian troops in this whole area at risk. And that's just been one of the more successful tactical propensities of the Russian side for quite some time now. Let's see, the last thing where there's actually been some success for the Russian side is up in the Volchansk area. You see this little area here, they continue to move south a little bit. These are not any big moves. I just want to point that out, make that clear that, we're not talking that there's been some big arrow movements where the Russians have continued to go through. But what you are seeing is continue to play out attrition warfare. So all the times all these big talks are going on in Brussels or in the United States or in Britain, Vladimir Zelensky, I keep showing you, even during this recent time, I've been showing you how he's still very cocky. Just 2 days ago, talk about how they're going to defeat Russia. He's still saying that they're going to defeat Russia. Meanwhile, you see on the battlefield that they're continuing to lose at a slow clip. But here's what's not slow, is the number of Ukraine troops killed and destroyed and the number of equipment destroyed continues to pile up. And this is a zero-sum option here. This is not something that they can replace. You obviously can't just make people. You're bleeding them on the battlefield. People are attriting because they're abandoning the battlefield on the Ukraine side. Many others are fleeing the country. They still are doing that. It's bleeding all over the place. And that the Western people and the Ukraine side seems to be oblivious to this at the leadership level. But the Russians aren't. They're focused on just this methodical continuing on. So while all these talks have been going on, the battlefield continues to go on, and the casualties, that's the key thing you got to understand. The Ukraine casualties keep piling up, and the loss of equipment keep piling up. And like I showed you in that southern part there, when the Russians are using more of these drones, more of these glide bombs, more of the missiles, and they're just striking place after place after place. And those equipment, there's not like this steady state of armored vehicles and replacement parts, et cetera, going in for the Ukraine side. It's a trickle. Fits and starts here and there. But what's not fits and start is the methodical, relentless destruction of those vehicles by the Russian side, which means they're continuing to degrade and deteriorate in the fabric of the ability of the armed force to continue to move on. Now, it could take, like I said, even for that area to get up to Zaporizhia, it could take the rest of the summer into the early fall. But what we don't know, and I don't know, is at what point does the human psyche snap on the Ukraine side at an army level, and all of a sudden they just disintegrate, and the fabric of the army itself just fall apart. And then now we know for sure that Russia has operational exploitation forces, and they can genuinely, literally roll into the rest of the country. Once they brave a collapse at some point at the front, Russia can roll through and potentially roll up the entire front in a certain area. And then everything will change. That hasn't happened so far. I thought that it was possible to happen last summer. Obviously, that didn't happen. Ukraine continued to fight. But what did happen was that the Russians are focused on this, and they believe they have time. So they can continue to operate this way, and they're not impatient. So they said, I think they thought it could have happened by the fall of last year too. It didn't. They didn't seem bothered by that. They're continuing on. We've talked to on this channel many Russian officials. We've showed you clips from others. They said, yeah, if this goes another year, 2 years, we're fine with that. We can go on. Others have said, no, if it could go on 10 years, we would never stop because this is an existential fight for us. If the Russians continue to do what they have done, then that should be a major red flag for the Ukrainian side and their Western backers, because we can't. We don't have time, because Ukraine doesn't have the manpower, even if somehow the Western side decided to pony up with a lot of anti-aircraft missiles that they don't have, or another massive flow of ammunition and weapons and additional armored vehicles, way above what's being even contemplated right now. Because so far, all the Western people are talking about is, yeah, we're going to put more sanctions on Russia, and we affirm Ukraine, and they give clapping and standing ovations to Zelensky like he did a couple of days ago when he talks about defeating Russia, all this stuff. That's all words, folks. That's all verbal. They're not, when it comes down to the ground, there's very little that the West is doing. And I don't know if they've just bought into their own analogies and their own stories and their own fantasies, that they don't know that the reality still matters. It's unclear, but what is very clear is the result on the ground. Okay, so that's the cut at your tactical a bit. Let's look at let's look up at the sorry, I gotta move my notes over here. Let's look at the operational and strategic situation here. So we have, first of all, here I want to talk about what the NATO summit, because we just had the NATO summit in The Hague a couple of days ago. All kinds of claims, and first of all, let's take a look at, I believe it's Mark Rutte, that's what we have queued up here next. Is that he's saying, hey, we're going to, again, kind of in the theme of forgetting what has happened on the ground, we're going to talk about what we're going to do at the bank.
Came phase 2 when you became president in January last year. Phase 2 is that all the countries not yet on 2% have now committed to the 2%. This is the old goal from Wales in 2014. 7 were not on 2%. Some were saying somewhere in the 2030s. Now this year, all of them, including Canada, including Italy, including Belgium, they have all now committed to the 2%. And now comes the big splash. Today, we will decide to go to 5%. We have to keep ourselves safe for our adversaries, but also because it is fair to equalize with the United States. With this 5%, the Europeans and the Canadians will equalize their defense spending with the United States. So this is not about American taxpayers paying more. This is about Europeans, Canadians paying more. And again, this would not have happened. I'm really saying this here.
Okay, we'll just cut that out there. That's just, he's going to continue on there to talk about how he's kind of lathering up President Trump and talk about, this is kind of embarrassing to us, quite frankly, just kind of as an aside here. You've seen this in many of President Trump's cabinet meetings, especially early on, where it just went from person to person. They're all just giving fealty to Trump and say, you're the most amazing president ever. You're the only one that could have done X, Y, or Z, whatever it is. And now you see NATO figuring out that's how to make Trump happy. So this idea, just be clear on here. So Rutte's talking about, let's go up to 5% of GDP, which is a radical increase over anything we've been doing since the end of the Cold War. And he's just given all this flattery to Trump to try to keep him in the alliance. Not unimportant that this 5% target is going to be 10 years from now, and that they're going to reassess in about 4 years from now after Trump is gone. So they'll be trying this incremental thing, they said, but they won't be holding themselves to any their feet on the fire. And I think they know Trump is historically has a very short attention span. And I think that they say, let's just keep him on board now and buy some time to get to a different president, whether that's a Democrat or Republican. Not sure that's going to succeed any well, but here's the thing, though. There is also a result. Words do matter, even if you're disconnected from reality on the ground. Others hear your words, and they do take action, and they do notice. And let's take a look about that, because one of the things that before we get to Putin, because his answer here is quite illuminating, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that one. But before that, let's focus on something else coming from the Russian media, because a lot of the claims is that we want to have this increase in defense spending. We want these. I think they just passed the 18th package, the 18th round of sanctions on Russia to try to cripple their economy. And now that a lot of people in the West are saying that, hey, it's starting to work because they're having some real trouble here. And in fact, let's see. Here's an actual rendering of what the Russians are saying about their own situation here. This is a BBC reporter reading from the Russian media.
In the Russian papers this morning, Arguments and Facts reports that from July the 1st, housing and utility tariffs in Russia will increase on average by 11.9%, but in some regions by 23 to 25%. This increase will be painful for many families. A former Russian Prime Minister, Sergei Stepashin, talks about his sister in St. Petersburg. Her monthly pension is 22,000 rubles. That's about $280. But the bills for her apartment come to 18,000 rubles a month. For a little two-room apartment, if I didn't help her out, I don't know how she'd survive. The paper also reports what senior Russian officials were saying about the economy at last week's St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. Central Bank Chair Elvira Nabiullina warned that many of the resources which had allowed Russia's economy to grow quite well in the last 2 years have now been exhausted. Russia's Minister for Economic Development, Maxim Reshetnikov, said that according to the current feelings of businesses, we are already, it seems to me, on the verge of going into recession. Sberbank.
Okay, so that you get the gist of it. That's more of that kind of talk. So the Russians are not shying away. We have some issues. Inflation is getting higher. We have some recession fears. There's some real problems in the economy. They're trying to deal with that. So that is true. That's not misinformation. That's the Russians themselves talking about in their open press to themselves. So maybe you might think, okay, well, then that makes sense. Then it's actually starting to succeed. Here's the thing about it. You can't see a movement in a certain direction and then just extend it mentally into infinity and say, yep, it'll continue to get bad. Nothing will ever change. And then poof, one day they'll collapse. Because it doesn't take much intelligence to figure out why that's not a good idea. Look at the Ukraine economy. It's been bolstered by everything possible in the West. There virtually is no economy in Ukraine. It's only being artificially fostered by billions of dollars every year to prop up the economy. I'm talking about everything from paying salaries to helping the country with making energy, electricity for all kinds of everything that's going on there, much less the military expenditures as well. And yet you see the place continues to operate. There's all kinds of problems economically there. They continue on. There's all kinds of problems with our economy. The U.S. itself last quarter had a negative growth. If the next quarter comes in, then we're by definition also in a recession. Does anyone think that the U.S. is just going to fall apart, or that Western Europe is going to fall apart, or that Ukraine itself is going to fall apart? They haven't. They're all continuing to go on. So you have this fantasy that because there are genuine Russian economic indicators of negative growth, or not even negative growth, it's not there yet, trouble and potential future problems, that you're like, yay, let's keep going down here and then that'll destroy. There's no evidence for that. And in fact, there is counter evidence to the contrary that says, no, that's unlikely to happen, because anytime, just like for ourselves, you go back to the 2008 and really everything in between, anytime you have negative indicators, the government will take action to try and correct things. And sometimes it's wobbly, sometimes it's good or not, but basically it goes on. It takes a lot to collapse something. And when you're fighting an existential fight, there is very little that you won't do just to bring that to occasion. Now, let's take a look at what Putin is saying about that, because he brings up some of these very issues, and we'll see. Let's see, make sure I get the right one here. I believe it's this one. Yeah, okay. So here is Putin, and he's going to be talking about that very issue. He was asked by a reporter, "What do you say about the fact that they're trying to? The NATO's going up to 5% spending to try and increase their military capacity and our economic woes?" Here's what he had to say.
This one-sided game has ended. The military wants to increase its spending. Well, let them increase it. But this also speaks of their aggressiveness. Let me explain why. Yes, our spending today is not small. This is 6.3% of GDP. Is this a lot or a little? I think it is a lot. This is, of course, one of the problems, including for the budget, which we must solve. And we are solving it with dignity. By the way, I do not want to draw political analogies now, because the reasons for the conflict are completely different. But only from the financial and economic point of view. For example, during the Korean War, which the US waged, they spent 14% of the budget on this, and during the Vietnam War, 10%. They solved these problems, however, mainly by increasing taxation on people with high incomes. Moreover, in the first case, they did not pay attention to macroeconomics. In the second case, they treated it more sensibly, but we are fighting for a healthy macroeconomics. Now about the expenses themselves. 6.3%. Is that a lot or a little? 6.3% of Russia's GDP for defense needs is 13.5 trillion rubles, and our entire, that means our GDP is 223 trillion rubles. That's 13.5 out of 223. A lot or a little? Quite a lot. Quite a lot. We paid for this inflation, but we are now fighting this inflation. Yes, we are purposefully moving towards landing the economy in some way.
Okay, so that's the situation. I'm going to keep that up here because I'm going to come back to that in just a second. But you see there, he's not shying away from. Yep, we are spending a lot of our GDP on defense. Yes, it is causing some problems. Yes, we do have some inflation. But then he does what we in the West rarely do, and he looks at it historically. You say, well, what did the U.S. do during its Vietnam and Korean wars? You see the numbers were off the charts there compared to what they're doing now. So it's way up there. So when you're fighting a war, you can sustain that for a long time. That's many years that we sustained that level. Of course, all during the Cold War, we had substantially more of our GDP going to all the Western countries. So when your national security is at risk, you will pay what you need to keep yourself safe. And you'll find ways to fix the economy or to manage it or to mitigate some of the problems, et cetera. So what we should understand is not listen to Putin. Never just trust anything he says at face value. He's going to give it from his own perspective, and he's going to put as good a spin on it as he can. But he is unique in that, at least among most of the Western country leaders who never talk about their own failures and they try to whitewash everything, he is saying, here's our problems and here's what we're going to do to fix it. Here's historically what's happened. So don't get the idea that we're going to have some fantasy that Russia is going to be different than every other country has been, to include ourselves. So if you're basing your hope for a collapse of the Russian economy and therefore collapse on the front line, that is a ridiculous thing to do that is counter to any kind of evidence or expectation of what people are going to do in case of when they have to deal with these situations, when they have to make hard choices. I want to go into another thing because then he's going to move here. Let me move up the let's see, where did that one go? Move up here to a little bit where he's going to talk about, hey, let's look at some apples to apples here, because when you look at what the Russians are doing and what the Western side is doing, you have some problems that you in the West might need to consider.
So, we had 4.3% economic growth last year, and the year before 4.1. This year it will be much more modest in order to combat inflation, but we are doing this purposefully. And in the Eurozone the growth is 0.9%. And in the leading economies, industrial development centers in Europe, there in general in Germany, and in France, everything is balancing on the brink of recession. As for the armed forces, they keep saying that we have some problems, that we will soon achieve a strategic defeat there. After all, Russia hasn't stopped this rhetoric, and at the same time, they are broadcasting that we are going to attack NATO countries. Where is the logic? If everything is falling apart, why are we going to attack NATO?
Okay, that's something I wanted to talk about because we talk about that a lot in the Western European. Mark Rutte said, they always say, hey, he's coming for us. He's coming for us next. And Putin's saying, look, which way is it? Are we this big behemoth that's just going to roll over all of Europe, or are we this weak country that's on the verge of collapse? Because he said, how can it be both ways? And we don't ever arrest it because, let's just be honest, the way our leaders don't care about the facts. They only care about the narrative. And if they can make you believe something and then make you act on it, and meaning make you support what they're doing without questioning it, then it's a success. So the facts don't actually matter. So Putin is really talking about rhetorical here. He's obviously, all the folks that are in the room right there understand what he's saying, and they already believe in him. And all the folks in Brussels and London and Paris and elsewhere probably aren't paying any attention either anyway, and they're not going to listen to any of it, certainly not in the United States. But to those people who are willing to look at the evidence and listen to what both sides are saying and then compare that with what's actually happening on the ground, that actually has some relevance, because you're saying, yeah, look, which way is it? Are they going to attack everybody, or are they about to fall apart? Because it really matters what's accurate on there about what we do next. Now, the one more thing from this interview I want to put on here, because it's really important. He's, again, going back to this issue that NATO's on a 5% increase. They want to, have a rebuild Europe program, $800 billion coming in. Everybody go up to 5% spending. German troops in Lithuania moving closer to the Russian border. All that stuff he sees here. And then Russia says, hey, you're talking about like we're going to attack somewhere, but let's take a look at what we're actually doing.
They want, let them do it. But now here's the most important thing. We are planning to reduce defense spending. We have, next year, and the year after, that is, for the next 3 years we are planning. Well, there is no final agreement yet between the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Defense, Development, but in general everyone is thinking in this direction, and Europe is thinking about how to increase its spending, on the contrary. So who is preparing for some aggressive actions, us or them? Yes, we want to complete the, special military operation with the result we need, of course. But all of this is calculated for this, and not for aggressive plans with respect to Europe and NATO countries.
Okay, that is very, very important. It's something we need to understand. You have NATO talking this 10-year plan to continue to build up, because they always claim this threat coming from Russia. And here you have Putin saying, and let me just caveat this right here, he can say whatever he wants. We'll see what actually happens with their future budgets. We only know what's happening in a certain time. But what he's saying right now is our plan, and we have this build up in a pretty steady state amount of whatever, 6-point-something% of GDP going to military to complete the special military operation, as they call it, the war against Ukraine. Their intention is to defeat Ukraine and to reestablish security on their western flank. That is their goal. And at least what he's claiming here publicly, that's all we can go by now, just like that's all we can go by what the Western side is saying, that they're going to increase defense spending. He's saying we're going to reduce defense spending once we accomplish our goals, because his idea is to live a secure, safe country and then to handle his economic issues, because he knows he can't get into a situation where he goes forever at those levels, because then it would cause a lot of problems. If they succeeded in winning the Ukraine war, but then maintained that or even accelerated it, as many in Russia want, by the way, and he's under a lot of pressure to go down that route, we'll see where he goes and what ends up happening at that. But if we're going on what people are saying, you have the NATO side saying that there's all this danger coming from the east, and they're building up all this combat power as a result. And then you have the folks in the east are saying, we're going to reduce our military expenditures because we're not going to do what you're saying. We have no plans to go forward at all. Now think about that for a second. Let's just assume, just work with me on this one. Let's say that the West isn't stupid, that they actually understand the realities here, that they know, that they can see. They can, certainly with a lot of their classified intelligence capabilities, they're aware that Russia is roughly about 6-point-something%, and that they don't see any evidence that they're going to complete this operation and then either maintain or accelerate their own defense spending in response, but that they actually do plan on reducing because they have economic pressures to do so. They have domestic pressures aside from whatever they want to do. They've got to maintain that, because if Putin doesn't maintain a good economic prospect, then he actually would be in the future at risk. So if we see that, and then yet we're still talking this other, that makes one think, maybe you actually don't believe that Russia is going to come rolling anywhere past any NATO border, but you just want to keep the enemy up there in front. We just want to keep there's just this evil, wicked picture up, and that's what we need to be afraid of. So keep putting money in the defense sector. Keep putting all this pressure on building up the defenses everywhere else, and keep going. But they know they don't have to act on it. Because when you look at what they're doing with their military, they're not reforming their military. They're not doing things that their military would have to do if they're actually thinking they might fight in the near term. They're just increasing budgets. They're actually buying high-ticket dollar items. But I haven't seen anywhere, maybe I've missed it, but I'm looking for it, and I haven't seen any, that there has been some big-time major changes in the way the armies are formed, the way they're trained, their doctrine, et cetera. And there needs to be radical changes. Let me just point blank tell you, and especially the U.S., I hope we're doing it, not tinkering around the edges. We need some radical changes if we ever get into a new modern war on the way things are with drones, aircraft, missiles, and all that kind of stuff, missile defense, et cetera. There needs to be some major changes. I haven't seen any of that. I've seen a lot of people just talking about cash, a lot of people going up to defense spending. So that leads me to believe that maybe the West is not as dumb as we think, but that they are aware of it and that they're trying to screw you, trying to screw us, regular people, by keeping this image of this, this fear-mongering thing up here that just, look at this evil. It's Hitler all over again. Everything's 1938. Keep giving us more money for the defense. The U.S. is doing it. We're going up to now a plan for $1 trillion budget next year. $1 trillion over what you see. There's no evidence that Russia's planning on doing anything, certainly not to us, not that would necessitate a massive increase like that. Listen, I'm all for a strong national defense. I'm in no way, shape, or form saying that we should quit being, quit having a national security, that we should not, resource, we should not fund, we should not train our forces, we should not reform it in a way that can fight modern wars. We should do all that stuff. I'm an advocate of that. But I'm not an advocate for let's just throw our money in the trash so that a small, tiny little sliver of the defense industrial base can get rich at your expense while we don't spend money on things that we need to, that again come at our expense. That's why I'm so adamant about this and why I want to show you the truth here. And you can see what all the people are saying. You can see what's actually happening on the ground. Just consider back to that tactical map I showed you at the beginning. I said that maybe by the end of the summer, that Russia might be up to Zaporizhia in the south, and that'll be close to the 4th year of war, man. And yet you want to plausibly claim that we need to be worried about a Russian juggernaut rolling into Western Europe? I mean, that's absurd. It's ridiculous at face value if you're willing to look at face value and see the evidence before you, both strategic, economic, and tactical. That's where we are, folks, and that's why we do this show. You need to know the truth, and we are unintimidated, uncompromised to give it to you. Okay, before we let you go, a couple other things. I want to do a quick update on the Iranian situation here. And look, a couple of things that are somewhat concerning about where we're going to go next. Trump gave a press conference, I believe it was yesterday. Gary loaded this up for me this morning. Appreciate that, Gary, on what President Trump has said.
Are you concerned at all about secret nuclear sites in Iran?
Secret nuclear site?
Yes, there might be some.
Not really. Can I tell you? They're exhausted. And Israel's exhausted too. And I dealt with both of them. And they both wanted it settled, both of them. And we did a great job, but they're exhausted. The last thing they're thinking about right now is nuclear. You know what they're thinking of? They're thinking about tomorrow, trying to live. It's such a mess. It's such a mess. The place was bombed to hell. And no, I'm not worried about it at all. And I'm putting out a little statement. I'm going to respond to the Ayatollah's statement yesterday that we won the war. Oh, God, we won the war. And I said, look, you're a man of great faith, a man who's highly respected in this country. You have to tell the truth. You got beat to hell. And Israel was beat up too. They were both beat up. And it was a great time to end it. It was quick. They got the hate out. There was a lot of hate. It would be great if they didn't have that hate. But the last thing they're thinking about is nuclear weapons right now.
Okay, let's just be clear here. If you see Israel suddenly willing to say, yes, let's go to an immediate ceasefire, there's a reason for that. You know for sure that Israel wants the complete destruction of Iran. They've been saying that for decades. And certainly in the last year or so, and it's definitely since Trump came into office, they've been pressing really hard for that. They actually pressed hard on the Biden administration too. He just wouldn't go that far. Trump was willing to. He was willing to go to. Now, all of a sudden, Israel is like, yeah, that's cool. Ceasefire's fine. Why do you suppose that may be? We'll talk about the Israel side first, and then we'll talk about the Iranian side secondly. Because, by the way, everybody, all three parties, Iran, Israel, and the United States, all had independent reasons to go to a ceasefire here. We'll talk about them one at a time. For Israel, they were heavily gashed. It was exposed that their Iron Dome system, David Sling, the Arrow system, the THAAD that we gave them, the Patriot system, this integrated air defense shield, which has some utility and can knock some things down, but is far, far, far from this impervious thing that was claimed. It was never true. We've shown you many times how that was the case. But now Israel has come face to face with the physical reality of it. They realized that because apparently the evidence showed that Iran had the capacity to maintain a steady state of a decent number of daily rockets and missiles coming into Israel, only a portion of which they could intercept. The rest of them were causing tremendous damage. I'm talking major research facilities hit, all kinds of hits in some of the built-up areas, whether that was from falling interceptor missiles that missed their target or errant Iranian missiles, because some of them are not very effective. So if they just put them in a general direction, many of them can hit buildings, etc. They were suffering civilian casualties. They can't stop them. And they say, we can't sustain this. We can't keep fighting this war that we can't stop. And you're going to suffer missile strike after missile strike after missile strike. So they had to have it. Additionally, they're also running low on interceptor missiles, period. So even what percentage they can intercept, they can see that over time they're going to lose even that because we can't replace them fast enough. That's a big problem. So when you see Netanyahu saying, okay, cool, we'll just have a peace then, that's only because that's what they have to have now. I have very high confidence that this is just a tactical pause for them to rebuild their capacity, to get some more missiles, to figure out what they can do to defend themselves better, and until they feel that they're capable, and then they would launch another one. There's no doubt in my mind that was on their minds and why they made that decision. The Iranian side, they were also getting significantly hit and damaged because their air defenses were shredded by the Israeli side. And so they were also getting hit hard. But you have to understand the mentality of the Iranian side and the mentality of the Israeli side are very, very different. For the Israeli side, we talked about this before. The Israeli side had to succeed. They had to win in order to come out successful on this. They had to either destroy the Iranian nuclear capacity or they had to have regime change. And if they don't have either of those, then they are not successful. They started a war and they didn't achieve their aims. The Iranian side, on the other hand, they have a different standard. They have to survive. They have to maintain some capacity to have this nuclear capacity, whether that's the reprocessing capabilities, the material that they've already reprocessed at 60%. Trump claims that they got rid of all that. They destroyed everything. The Iranian side and independent intelligence assessments are saying, yeah, we don't even know where 400 pounds of this reprocessed uranium is. We don't know how many of the sites they have. Some of them weren't even hit. Did they move out some of these centrifuges before the bombs came down, as many have claimed? We don't know, but evidence is pretty high that they did. Or there are even sites that we don't know anything about. So the danger that Iran could be secretly going to a bomb now can't be taken off the table, and there's certainly a lot of motivation for them to do so. Whether they will remains to be seen. But they were taking a lot of hits, so they wanted to stop it. They didn't want to start it in the first place, but they sure did want to stop it. So they're cool with it, and that's why Ayatollah came out afterwards and said, "We won." Because in their mind, you understand this, they know that they were hit hard. But in their mind, they succeeded because just to not lose is victory for them, just like it was for the Houthis. They have the same mentality. They're still alive. So that's what you need to understand from the Iranian side. They wanted a ceasefire. They needed to stop the bombing. But their version of victory is a lot lower level than what the Israeli side had, and they didn't achieve it. So the Israeli side haven't succeeded. U.S. side also needed this ceasefire, just like we needed to end the Houthi strikes in the Red Sea after about a month plus of doing that, because Trump realized we'll never quell them, but we'll just keep spending $1 billion every week or two intercepting these missiles, and we'll never stop them. It's a never-ending situation. It will drain us of our resources. Same thing here, except on a higher level, because now that we're using a lot of interceptor missiles, and we're still apparently giving some to Ukraine. We don't have that many. I suspect that we're already into our strategic reserves. I would guess that we are, because I just don't think we've had enough to maintain the amount of missiles that have been used there. But that's where we are here. So now we've had this pause. So where it goes next is anybody's guess, because all three sides have some motivation for this to stay ceasefire. So my guess would be that it's going to stay in a ceasefire condition for a period of time, months, possibly years. Who can say for sure? But everybody's kind of licking their wounds and trying to figure some things out. So I think that probably that one may well be off the table for a while, but you can't rule anything out, because you get some hotheads acting some ways and taking some actions, and things could explode back up. This is the Middle East, so no guarantees at all on that. That's my best guess as of today. Last thing I want to look at here is on Gaza, because President Trump was also asked in the Oval Office about what the situation is with Gaza, because the claim is going to be that, well, we want a comprehensive ceasefire. First it was Iran, now we want to go to Gaza.
How close are you and your administration to a deal in terms of Gaza, a ceasefire right now?
Often asked, and I think it's close. I just spoke with some of the people involved. It's a terrible situation that's going Gaza, he's asking about. And we think within the next week we're going to get a ceasefire. And we're supplying, as you know, a lot of money and a lot of food to that area because we have to. I mean, you have to. We're, in theory, not involved in it, but we're involved because people are dying. And I look at those crowds of people that have no food, no anything, and, you know, we're the ones that are getting it there. Some of it's being taken by some bad people, you know, once you give it and you give it out, and they're supposed to be taking care of the people, and they end up stealing the food and selling it. But we have a pretty good system now, but so we're helping with that. You see the lines of people that just get one meal, essentially. But it's too bad. Other countries aren't helping out. Nobody's helping out. We're doing that because I think we have to on a humanitarian basis.
Nobody's helping out. Nobody else is helping. There are countries all over the planet screaming to help out. The only reason there has been so limited food is because Israel has blocked it. And when he says that we're getting food in, that is just simply not true. We have gotten a little bit of food in there only because of great pressure. It's a very little bit. But the people are continuing to starve. And it's not because Hamas is stealing the food, which is what he said there. It's because the Israelis have prevented it from getting in for the most part. But now then there's this real pernicious thing going on here. And unfortunately, I got to show you something else here. A lot of people won't like this in the West. But let's just take a look at it. What we know, this is in The Guardian. This is what we know about the killing of Palestinians at the food point in Gaza. The Israelis have taken over the distribution of food, and there have been, I think, let me put this other headline up here. 400 Palestinians have been killed around the food aid hubs that the UN rights people are watching on this. There has been, and it's just daily, almost every other day. In fact, let me go back to that. Let me go back to that previous headline because there was some quote in here. That on this is last Sunday. On Sunday, these 31 Palestinians were killed as Israeli forces opened fire at the site of a food distribution center in Rafah, according to witnesses. On Monday, another 3 Palestinians were killed by Israeli fire at the same site, according to health officials and a witness. On Tuesday, 27 people were killed after Israeli forces opened fire again. This is a continuing situation going back and forth to where Israel has very limited food aid distribution points. And then when Palestinians come up there, then many of them are killed. It is the most torturous, barbaric action you can imagine. And yet, you didn't hear Trump say a word about that, did you? He didn't mention anything about that. 400 people killed trying to get food. And you know, because these things keep happening at the same food sites, and there's only a handful of them, and they know that their options are either come and risk being shot to death getting food, or don't go there and starve to death. I mean, that is unconscionable, but that is exactly what's going on here, folks. That is exactly what we're doing. And instead of just bemoaning and blaming Hamas for everything under the sun, we need to recognize Hamas is not the one shooting 400 people to death. That's somebody else over there. And we need to call that out. And if you consider that intolerable and something that should never happen, then take action. And if you don't take action, we have to be honest, folks. Then you have to say that apparently you don't find that intolerable. You don't find that intolerable, or you would take action. It's right there in the news. Of course, I'm sure he's getting the classified version too. And if he doesn't take action, that means he's fine with it. And I assure you, that's how it's being viewed in Israel. And they will continue to do these kind of barbaric things. Towards what end, I can't imagine. I guess they still hope that somehow they can end up killing many, many more people. And there's been a Harvard study out, I think, since I don't think we've mentioned this on the air here, that says that the actual number of dead is probably not 60, 70,000 like ironically, the Hamas medical information group says. Probably somewhere around 300 or more thousand that have been killed. I saw one study that suggested it could be over 400,000 dead and missing, et cetera, under the rubble of the entire Gaza Strip. Those are the realities, folks. Those are the realities. And if we don't take action, that means we tacitly condone it. History will not judge us well. Our souls and our conscience should not judge us well. One last point I want to talk about before we leave here, and that is, and I mentioned this before it happened with the Iranian situation, in the War Powers Act. There was a vote in the Senate a couple of days ago that the Senate rejected. I think this was the day before yesterday. There was an attempt to limit Trump's ability to strike Iran again. It says the Senate voted on Friday, rejected a Democratic measure that would have forced President Trump to go to Congress for approval for another military strike against Iran. The resolution had little chance of succeeding in a Republican-led Congress that is split along partisan lines. So let me translate that into English for you, folks. That means that there is no longer the balance of power in the United States. There's no longer the three branches of government that are constrained and limited by the other branches, because the war-making power has now been solidly placed in the pocket of the commander-in-chief, whoever it is, Trump right now, and any future president will have the same power. Whether Republican, whether Democrat, doesn't make any difference. You see that the legislative branch has denuded itself and said, we have submitted our power to the chief executive. It is now basically a monarch in terms of war-making power. It is in the hands of Donald Trump and Donald Trump alone. Nobody will stop him. He will be able to do whatever he wants. There was some complaining and moaning about a couple of members about this before it stopped, but no one took any real action. And then when somebody actually did try to bring legislation to the floor, there is so few people willing to do what's right, to follow their own constitution, that now then Trump knows for sure he can literally do anything he wants. And the reason why our founding fathers put that in the Constitution to limit the power, because they saw what happens when you get a man that has dictatorial powers, the ability to launch wars at his own discretion. It's catastrophic for the country itself. We wanted to avoid that, but we have forgotten it, or we have chosen to ignore it. And we're like, yeah, but I like my guy because he limits himself. He doesn't go big. It's not like he's going to attack China or Russia or something like that. We'll keep to something we can contain. That by itself is a problem, because what you're saying is that there's no moral code. There's none. It's pure power politics. I'll get what I want with power. And if it's just a little one here, it doesn't matter if we kill a lot of people. It only matters if we get what we want policy-wise. That by itself is a major siren and a red flag that should trouble all of us. It definitely troubles me. But even if you want to take that part out of it, this is potentially catastrophic for us at some point down the line, because some chief executive, whether it's Trump or whoever follows him, is one day going to get us into a war that we can't get out of. And it won't be a little one. It'll explode in our face. It'll blow up. And all of a sudden, we can lose a war that should never have been fought because we were unwilling to just follow our own law. So that seems like kind of a minor issue. It's almost like an asterisk to what's been going on with these bigger issues. I don't want to get so caught up in the weeds of looking at what has happened and what's likely to happen next that we miss the bigger picture. There is a dangerous move going on here, folks. Something we damn sure need to get handled fast, because once something like that happens, once you get that explosion in your face, you can't fix it then. Now it's just a matter of how much blood's going to flow, how much damage and destruction is going to result on us. We'll have to see how that happens too. I'd like to say I hope that we can change, but you see, they actually had a vote in the Senate and they collapsed and they forfeited, and we are where we are. We're going to keep bringing you the truth, folks. As long as there's a chance to change things, we're going to continue to bring you the truth and just pray to God that sanity can somehow emerge in some quarter while there's still time to do something about it, because otherwise it's going to be a bad situation. Thanks very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode back in Washington, D.C. next week on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.